November 1913. The Great Lakes were screaming with frost, but inside a somber home in Goderic, the world had gone silent for one man. Thomas Thompson stood trembling before a casket, convinced that the broken body within was all that remained of his son. The body bore every unique mark, the scars, the tattoos, the history. But as the funeral rites began, a shadow appeared in the doorway. His son, alive and well, watching his own burial from the threshold. This chilling anomaly was the first sign that something had gone catastrophically wrong on the dark waters of Lake Huron. While one soul escaped a watery grave through a bizarre twist of fate, the vessel he was destined to board, the unsinkable Titan SS James Carruthers, was not granted such mercy. How could the largest, most advanced freighter in Canada simply evaporate without a single distress call? For over a century, the lake held its breath, guarding a secret that defied every law of maritime engineering. What was it that turned this steel fortress into a death trap in a matter of minutes? Stay with us until the very end, as we dive into the pitch-black depths to reveal the long-lost evidence discovered in 2025 that finally shatters a 112-year-old mystery. The aftermath of the Great Storm of 1913, forever etched into maritime history as the White Hurricane, was a scene of apocalyptic desolation that defied human comprehension. As the winds finally began to lose their murderous edge on November 11th, the Canadian and American coastlines along Lake Huron were transformed into a chaotic graveyard of twisted steel and splintered timber. The sheer scale of the disappearance was staggering. 8 massive freighters had vanished without a single survivor, including the Charles S. Price, the Isaac M. Scott, and the Henry B. Smith. Yet, the disappearance that sent the deepest shockwaves through the Canadian maritime community was that of the SS James Carruthers. She was the 550-foot steel fortress of the Great Lakes, the most modern and celebrated freighter in the Canadian fleet. The fact that such a titan could simply vanish in an instant, leaving only a trail of wreckage along the Ontario shoreline, created a profound sense of existential dread. In the agonizing days that followed, search parties combed the debris-strewn beaches of Goderic, Ontario, where the lake was beginning to vomit up its victims, casting frozen, oil-slicked forms onto the sand, each one a grim puzzle piece in a forensic mystery that was only just beginning to unfold. It was amidst this atmosphere of collective mourning, a man burdened by the weight of a father's worst nightmare, Thomas Thompson traveled to the makeshift morgue at Goderic to search for his son, John Thompson, who had been serving as a crewman aboard the ill-fated Carruthers. The scene at the morgue was a visceral display of the lake's cruelty. But as Thompson stood before one particular body, the air seemed to leave the room. The physical evidence was not just convincing, it was overwhelming. The body before him possessed an array of specific idiosyncratic marks that mirrored his son's identity with surgical precision. A distinctive JT tattoo on the arm, a noticeable scar across the bridge of the nose, and a missing front tooth. Most chillingly, the corpse displayed a rare congenital trait, webbed toes, a detail so specific that it seemed to eliminate any shadow of a doubt. The identification was legally and emotionally finalized. Thomas Thompson had found his son, and the process of bringing him home for a final, dignified farewell began with a heavy heart and the finality of grief. The narrative, however, was about to take a turn into the surreal, a twist that would become one of the most legendary stories in Great Lakes lore. Back at the Thompson family home, as a somber funeral service was underway, and the family was gathered in a state of profound sorrow, the door creaked open. In stepped John Thompson, alive, healthy, and completely bewildered by the morning ritual taking place in his own living room. The shock was near universal. It was as if a ghost had walked into the light of day. The explanation was as simple as it was miraculous. At the last moment before the Carruthers departed from the docks at Fort William, John had made a snap decision not to board. Instead, he had taken a position on a different vessel that had managed to skirt the worst of the White Hurricane's fury. While his family was weeping over a casket they believed held his remains, John had been navigating safe waters, unaware that he had been declared dead by the very features that defined his physical existence. This bizarre resurrection immediately gave way to a question of profound and haunting weight. If John Thompson was standing in the doorway, then who was the man in the coffin? Despite the near impossible coincidence of the JT tattoo, the scar, the missing tooth, and even the webbed toes, the man lying in the Thompson family plot was a stranger, a nameless victim of the James Carruthers, whose true identity had been erased by a freakish alignment of physical traits. To this day, that individual remains one of the great unknowns of the 1913 storm. He was buried under a name that wasn't his, mourned by a family that wasn't his, while his own loved ones likely waited in vain for a son or brother who would never return. This case of mistaken identity serves as a chilling prelude to our investigation, highlighting the chaotic, predatory nature of the lake and the industrial hubris that placed these men in the path of a storm that could strip a human being not only of their life but of their very name. In early November 1913, a deceptive stillness gripped the Great Lakes, a siren song of safety that would soon lead to the deadliest storm in maritime history. Across Lake Superior, Michigan, and Huron, the month began not with a roar, but with a seductive, golden warmth. On November 5th and 6th, thermometers in ports like Fort William and Duluth hit an unseasonable 60 degrees. For the mariners of the era, this autumnal haze was a catastrophic calculation error. It was a meteorological lull, masking a darkness that was quietly gathering its strength to strike. In the cutthroat world of Great Lakes shipping, where profit was measured with cold precision in bushels of grain and tons of iron ore, this window of clear weather was perceived as a divine opportunity, a final chance to maximize revenue before the winter freeze descended to lock the gates of the Sault Ste. Marie locks. This meteorological trap created a frantic, almost feverish energy at the docks. Vessel owners and captains shared a collective, albeit misplaced, belief that the season's most violent weather was still weeks away. As the sun rose on the morning of November 6th, the port of Fort William, now known as Thunder Bay, Ontario, became the stage for a meeting that historians would later examine with a sense of tragic irony. Docked at the pier was the SS James Carruthers, the undisputed jewel of the Canadian commercial fleet. Having been launched only months prior, in May 1913, she was a marvel of the Edwardian industrial age. To walk her decks was to encounter the sharp, metallic tang of fresh enamel and the heavy scent of hot, lubricating grease from her massive triple expansion engines. She was 529 feet of state-of-the-art engineering, a steel leviathan designed to be the ultimate answer to the volatile temperament of the inland seas. It was here, amidst the clatter of loading chutes and the hiss of steam, that Captain William H. Wright of the Carruthers encountered Captain S.A. Lyons of the SS J.H. Shuttle. Witnesses to their conversation described a scene defined by professional camaraderie and an immense, almost tangible sense of pride. Wright was a seasoned mariner, a man who had earned his stripes through years of navigating the treacherous shoals and unpredictable currents of the lakes. Now, commanding the largest freighter ever built in Canada, he spoke of his vessel with the quiet confidence of a man who believed he was driving an invincible machine. The Carruthers was a fortress of steel, a symbol of national industrial prowess. As the two captains discussed their intended routes toward the lower lakes, the dialogue was stripped of any mention of survival or caution. Instead, the conversation focused on the metrics of the age: speed, fuel efficiency, and the staggering weight of the cargo currently being poured into the Carruthers' 31 massive hatch holds. However, in reality, the maritime industry of 1,913 was caught in a fever pitch of capitalistic competition. The St. Lawrence and Chicago Steam Navigation Company had invested a king's ransom into the construction of the Carruthers, and Wright was keenly aware that his role was as much corporate custodian as it was ship's master. In the rigid social and professional hierarchy of the Great Lakes, being handed the keys to the nation's flagship came with a heavy, unspoken ultimatum: performance. During this era, the most highly prized commodity in a captain was the reputation of being a heavy weather captain, a man who possessed the nerve to maintain grueling schedules despite the elements. For Wright, this was only his third voyage on this brand new vessel. The eyes of the company, the shareholders, and the entire Canadian maritime community were fixed upon him. Every bushel of wheat on board represented a commitment that the company expected him to keep, creating a mental environment where caution was equated with cowardice and delay was synonymous with defeat. When she was launched in the spring of 1913, the Carruthers was regarded as a titan of the Edwardian industrial age, a steel behemoth whose statistics were nothing short of staggering for the era. Stretching a colossal 529 feet in length with a beam of 58 feet, she commanded a displacement capacity of 15,000 tons. To the thousands of spectators who gathered at the Collingwood shipyards, she was a true leviathan. Her cavernous cargo holds alone were capable of swallowing 375,000 bushels of wheat, a volume so immense it would have required a train of 375 rail cars to transport the same load across land. The heart of this giant was a massive triple-expansion steam engine, a masterpiece of reciprocating motion designed to drive a single towering propeller. It was intended to push this steel mountain through the Great Lakes with relentless efficiency. Yet beneath this veneer of gargantuan strength and industrial hubris lay a series of critical, short-lived design flaws that modern engineering forensics now identify as the ship's Achilles heel. While the Carruthers was engineered with a state-of-the-art double-bottom hull to protect against grounding on the treacherous shoals of the St. Lawrence, her upper deck was, in reality, a gallery of extreme vulnerability. The most glaring fatal flaw resided in the architecture of her 31 massive hatch covers. In 1913, these hatches were not the heavy, hydraulic steel lids that define modern lake freighters. Instead, they were archaic assemblies comprised of individual wooden planks laid loosely over the openings. These planks were covered by heavy canvas tarpaulins and secured by iron batten bars and wooden wedges. While these wooden hatches were sufficient for navigating standard swells, they were never engineered to withstand the colossal static load of a Great Lakes maelstrom. In the unique conditions of a storm like the one brewing in 1913, waves deposit hundreds of tons of solid water weight, equivalent to several heavy locomotives, directly onto these wooden spans. Once a single hatch failed under this crushing, vertical hydraulic pressure, the vessel's structural integrity was compromised instantly. Frigid water would pour into the grain-filled holds, causing the wheat to shift and expand, which in turn destroyed the ship's buoyancy in a matter of agonizing minutes. This fundamental mechanical vulnerability becomes even more striking when contrasted with the whaleback freighters of the same era. To the traditional mariner, the whaleback, with its cigar-shaped hull and rounded, sloping decks, was an aesthetic disaster, frequently mocked as a pig ship. Yet, the whaleback possessed a brilliant, almost evolutionary survival trait. Its rounded topsides and small, bolted-down circular hatches allowed massive waves to simply wash over and around the vessel without finding a flat, expansive surface to crush. In the brutal, unforgiving trial of Lake Huron in 1913, the ugly whaleback survived the tempest, while the magnificent Carruthers was betrayed by her own traditional, flat-decked grandeur. Furthermore, the Carruthers suffered from a common ailment of the giant-class freighters of the early 20th century. She was significantly underpowered for her mass. Her engine, while physically massive, was tuned for fuel economy in the calm, profitable waters of midsummer, not for wrestling against the kinetic energy of hurricane-force headwinds. When faced with the sheer atmospheric fury of the White Hurricane, her propellers would have struggled to maintain steerage way. As her speed dropped, she would have fallen into the trough of the waves, leaving her dead in the water, a helpless, stationary target for the broadside assault of the lake's legendary Three Sisters waves. As the evening of the 6th of November 1913 descended upon the bustling port of Fort William, Ontario, the SS James Carruthers lay heavy in the water, her massive holds being gorged with a staggering 375,000 bushels of wheat. This golden cargo, destined for the Ogilvy flour mills in Port Colborne, represented the lifeblood of the Canadian maritime economy and the high-stakes industrial pressure of the pre-winter sprint. The initial transit was deceptive, but by 3 a.m. on November 8th, the first predatory whispers of the storm began to rake across the surface of Lake Superior. The atmospheric grace period of an unseasonably warm autumn had expired. The wind, in a sudden and violent betrayal, veered from the southwest to the northwest, bringing with it plunging temperatures, horizontal snow squalls, and mounting seas that signaled the arrival of the White Hurricane. By this point, the James Carruthers and her companion vessel, the SS James Carruthers, were already more than halfway to the Soo Locks, laboring against the deteriorating conditions that were rapidly transforming the Great Lakes into a theater of war. By late evening on the 8th, both vessels were threading the needle of the St. Mary's River, zigzagging through the narrow, treacherous channels with a grim determination. It was during this river transit that the Carruthers, powered by her massive triple expansion engines, surged past the Midland Prince, which was battling its way upstream, a fleeting moment of industrial dominance before the true fury of the lake was unleashed. At precisely 12:50, 3 a.m. on November 9th, the Carruthers made her final terrestrial contact, docking briefly to take on a final burden of fuel at the Pickens, Mather and Company coal dock near Detroit, Michigan. With her bunkers topped off to ensure her propellers could bite into the coming gale, the Steel Titan entered the open maw of Lake Huron. The J.H. Shuttle followed closely behind, her crew still able to spot the flickering stern lights of the Carruthers as they both steered a southeast course into what would become the deadliest trap in maritime history. The massive temperature differential between the relatively warm lake water and the invading, high-velocity Arctic air mass created a meteorological phenomenon known to mariners as sea smoke. This was not merely a fog. It was a thick, ethereal mist that rose from the lake's surface in ghostly, swirling tendrils, enveloping the 550-foot Titan in an impenetrable, blinding white shroud. It was here, within this opaque and suffocating veil, that the crew of the Carruthers shared their final moments of connection with the outside world. Through the shifting mist, they exchanged final visual signals with their peers on nearby vessels, fleeting hand gestures of camaraderie, and the mournful, baritone blasts of steam whistles that echoed hollowly through the haze. By the stroke of midnight, the white hurricane shed its deceptive mask and revealed a face of pure, hellish fury. In a terrifying atmospheric shift, the wind suddenly veered from the southwest to the north with whip-cracking speed, creating what mariners fear most, a confused sea. Instead of predictable, rhythmic swells, the waves began to collide from multiple directions simultaneously, creating chaotic peaks and troughs. This instability birthed the legendary Three Sisters trios of massive, freak waves that arrived in such rapid succession that they allowed no time for a vessel of the Carruthers' length to recover its buoyancy. On Lake Huron, these waves crested at a staggering 35 feet, roughly 11 meters, the height of a 3-story building. For the James Carruthers, these were moving mountains of high-density water that hammered her flat, traditional Edwardian decks with the force of falling skyscrapers. The wooden hatch covers, the ship's primary vulnerability, began to groan and splinter under the sheer static load of thousands of tons of water that refused to drain as the ship labored in the trough of the sea. The fates of the two companions diverged based on harrowing tactical and psychological decisions. While the Carruthers was believed to be steaming steadily toward her destination, Captain S.A. Lyons of the Shuttle found himself trapped in the same aquatic meat grinder, but his response was defined by an obsessive survival instinct. Lyons altered the shuttle's course 4 separate times during the height of the storm, aggressively hunting for a heading that would minimize the broadside impact on his vulnerable hatches. He fought for every inch of steerage, at one point turning his ship completely around into the teeth of the wind, even though it meant heading away from his destination. This was the defining psychological divide. While the industrial culture of 1913 exerted immense pressure, Lyons chose survival at all costs. This relentless maneuvering kept the shuttle's hatches from being smashed inward. As the gray, sickly dawn of Black Sunday finally broke, Captain Lyons caught one final, fleeting glimpse of the James Carruthers. Through a momentary, jagged break in the blinding snow, the silhouette of the massive Canadian freighter appeared on the distant horizon, her lights flickering like a dying candle in a gale. She was clearly in a terminal struggle. Her bow was buried deep and sluggishly in the swells, and she appeared to be listing, fighting a battle that her underpowered engines and traditional design were never intended to win. The 375,000 bushels of wheat, now likely shifting in the hold as the water breached the hatches, acted as an internal anchor of doom. And then, as quickly and ghost-like as she had appeared, the Carruthers vanished into a solid wall of white. No distress signal was ever picked up. No emergency rockets were seen. The most modern freighter on the Great Lakes simply ceased to exist in an instant. The brutal contrast between these two vessels serves as a chilling case study in maritime psychology and engineering. The shuttle would eventually limp into port, unrecognizable under a thick armor of ice and battered to the point of structural failure, to tell the tale. The Carruthers, however, descended into the graveyard of the Great Lakes. In the days that followed, the Canadian coastline became a forensic map of industrial hubris. Search parties rumbled across debris-strewn beaches, uncovering empty lifeboats and oars marked with the ship's name. But the most haunting evidence was the recovery of the crew's remains, 25 men who were no longer sailors, but silent witnesses to the lake's unyielding power. Although the SS James Carruthers had vanished into the opaque, churning heart of the storm, leaving Captain Lyons and the crew of the shuttle to wonder if they had witnessed the last gasps of a Titan, the tragedy was not an entirely silent one. On the agonizingly dark and blizzard-shattered night of November 9th, 1913, the terrified residents of the small coastal town of Lake Huron, Ontario, bore witness to a sensory horror that would haunt their local folklore for generations. Through the deafening, bone-chilling roar of 80-mile-per-hour winds, the townspeople reported hearing the desperate, rhythmic wail of a massive steam whistle, a mechanical scream for mercy that pierced through the horizontal snow. Squinting into the gale, they caught fleeting, ghostly flickers of red distress flares arching briefly into the charcoal sky before being snuffed out by the atmospheric fury. It was the terminal cry for help from a steel leviathan in the throes of a violent death. Yet, held in the unyielding grip of the white hurricane, the people on shore were utterly powerless. Lake Huron had transformed into an impenetrable wall of jagged ice and liquid chaos that no rescue craft could hope to survive. The James Carruthers was dying within earshot of human civilization, her crew likely staring at the faint lights of a shore they would never touch. Yet in that moment of isolation, they might as well have been on the far side of the moon. Along the Canadian coastline in the agonizing days after the storm subsided, as search parties combed the debris-strewn beaches, they uncovered a trail of wreckage that provided a chillingly precise forensic record of the ship's final hours. Unlike the victims of many maritime disasters who are found in a state of sudden, panicked disarray, the bodies of the Carruthers crew drifted into the shallows clad in heavy greatcoats and with their life jackets securely, almost methodically, fastened. This specific detail is of paramount importance as it shatters the theory of an instantaneous explosion or a sudden, unforeseen plunge. Instead, it paints a picture of a protracted, disciplined, and terrifying struggle. It suggests that Captain Wright and his 25 men had ample, agonizing time to realize the full extent of their peril. They had time to gather their thoughts, time to dress for the lethally cold water, and time to stand together on a deck that was slowly, inexorably tilting toward eternity as the lake systematically dismantled their vessel. Scattered among the larger wreckage were the smaller, searchers found splintered fragments of the ill-fated wooden hatch covers that had ultimately betrayed the ship, alongside a lone, salt-crusted life ring bearing the name James Carruthers in bold, defiant black letters. Most poignantly, investigators recovered a silver pocket watch from the vest of a drifted sailor. The internal brass gears had rusted solid at the exact microsecond the freezing Lake Huron water breached its casing and extinguished the mechanical heartbeat within. The watch hands remained frozen, forever marking the precise minute the James Carruthers took her final, terminal plunge into the abyss. These artifacts served a profound purpose. They transformed a massive industrial and corporate loss into a deeply personal human tragedy, reminding a grieving nation that 25 distinct lives, dreams, and histories were extinguished alongside Canada's greatest ship. For more than a century, the Carruthers remained the great ghost of Lake Huron, a vessel that seemed to defy every technological effort at discovery. Its location a subject of endless debate and maritime myth. That silence finally ended in May 2025. David Trotter, the legendary 84-year-old shipwreck hunter who has dedicated over half a century to mapping the graveyard of the Great Lakes, successfully closed the most famous cold case in Canadian maritime history. Utilizing a sophisticated suite of state-of-the-art side-scan sonar and high-definition deep-sea ROVs, remotely operated vehicles, Trotter's expedition team identified a massive, anomalous signature 20 miles off the coast of Harbor Beach, resting in the perpetual twilight of the lake floor at a depth of 190 feet. The subsequent deep dive analysis, provided by high-resolution sonar and 4K camera feeds, revealed a breathtaking and somber sight that settled decades of speculation. The SS James Carruthers does not lie upright on the bottom. She is completely turtle, backed entirely inverted, and resting heavily on her shattered superstructure. This 2025 discovery provided the smoking gun that maritime investigators needed to finalize the stability shift theory. Forensic engineers now conclude that as the archaic wooden hatch covers failed under the relentless bombardment of the Three Sisters waves, thousands of tons of water saturated the 375,000 bushels of wheat in the holds. This initiated a catastrophic cargo shifting event, where the grain transitioned from a stable solid into a heavy, fluid mass that slid violently to one side of the vessel. The resulting shift in the center of gravity made the ship's stability mathematically impossible. She didn't just sink by the bow or stern, she flipped over like a child's toy in a bathtub, trapping pockets of air and her final secrets within the hull as she descended into the pitch-black silence. Today, the wreck exists as a silent, submerged museum of time at 58 meters. The oxygen-poor, frigid fresh water of Lake Huron has acted as a perfect preservative. The white paint on her hull remains startlingly bright, and the name James Carruthers is still clearly legible through the fine layer of silt that has settled over the last 112 years. However, her true legacy extends far beyond her resting place on the lakebed. The loss of the Carruthers, alongside the 11 other vessels obliterated in the Great Storm of 1913, served as the titanic moment for the inland seas. In the immediate wake of the disaster, the maritime authorities of both Canada and the United States enacted the sweeping 1914 safety rules, a legislative overhaul that fundamentally and permanently changed the industry. These regulations mandated the immediate replacement of vulnerable wooden hatch covers with reinforced interlocking steel lids. They revolutionized the Great Lakes meteorological reporting systems to ensure no captain would ever be blind to a storm again. And perhaps most importantly, they dismantled the dangerous culture of the heavy weather captain. By empowering masters to prioritize the safety of their crew over the demands of corporate shipping magnates without the fear of termination, these laws ensured that the 25 men of the Carruthers did not die in vain. They died so that future generations of mariners might live to see the harbor. As we look back across the span of 112 years, the saga of the SS James Carruthers remains a sobering, essential reminder of the inherent limits of human ambition. We continue to build pharaoh-like monuments of steel and boast of our technological invincibility. Yet, we remain merely finite guests on a planet governed by the indifferent and often violent laws of nature. The Carruthers was the pride of an empire, a fortress of industry, and an engineering miracle of her age. Yet, she was undone by a few simple wooden planks and a sudden, cruel shift in the wind. As the sun sets over the horizon of Lake Huron today, the water often looks calm, rhythmic, and almost inviting. But somewhere beneath those waves, in the absolute cold and the dark, the James Carruthers still rests, guarding the final, unspoken memories of the men who sailed her with pride into the very heart of the storm. Stay with us as we continue to peel back the layers of the hidden history of the Great Lakes. For every wreck is a story of human endeavor, and every story is a lesson in humility that we cannot afford to forget. Finally, before wrapping up today's message, thank you for standing with me on this journey into the heart of the storm. If the story of the Carruthers or any other maritime tragedy has touched your life, please share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. Your voice keeps this history alive. If you found value in this deep dive, a like, share, and follow would mean the world to our crew. as we prepare for our next voyage. Stay safe, and I will see you all in the next video.